So some of you might know if you've been paying attention to my channel, I got the Fuji X-T200 for my wife as a gift because I wanted her to kind of discover the joys of camera photography, to get away a little bit from smartphone photography. Whenever we go on trips and stuff like that, I'm always the one sort of fiddling around with the camera, and I think it can be annoying to her because she's not also involved in that process, and so I figured that if she had her own camera, then she would also sort of participate in this sort of photography hobby, and we could enjoy it together. Now, the Fuji X-T200 comes with this kit lens. It's a 15 to 45 mil variable aperture f3.5 to 5.6 kit lens, which is like okay, but it certainly doesn't create those magical shots with plenty of background blur. The kind of stuff that made me really fall in love with camera photography. And so I was looking at getting her a prime lens as another gift for her Fuji X mount. And, I was considering the 35 millimeter f2 because it's a nice small light lens. And I think it has just enough of a telephoto aspect to it to kind of be useful for portraits and to give you that sort of nice subject isolation and background blur. Plus, at the time, Fuji had just announced an XC version of that lens, which is nice and affordable. And so I was really thinking about getting that as a gift. But the thing I wasn't sure about was whether or not the 35 mil focal length would be very practical. It would be fun to shoot with. I have the 35 mil f1.8 for my Sony a6400, but truthfully at the time I didn't really use it for much outside of some video gigs. And, for the sort of talking head type of videos like I'm doing now, I mostly use the 16 mil f1.4. And, for other things, I would use my 18 to 135 kit lens, or for portraits, I'd use an adapted alpha mount 85 mil f1.4. So the 35 mil actually didn't get much use for photography. It was mostly used for some video gigs. And so as a test to see whether or not this is a fun, practical focal length, I decided to put this lens on my camera and just leave it on there and force myself to go out and take pictures with it every day with just this lens. And I thought that I could use my sort of experience with this to help me decide whether or not to get the Fuji version, the 35 mil f2 for my wife. And I will now show you the results from that sort of period of time, that my experience shooting just with the 35 mil, and you can see for yourself the results. So as you can see, I got some pretty neat looking pictures. I find that with the 35 millimeter focal length on an APS-C camera, you do have to be a bit more careful with how you compose a shot. You know, one of my favorite rules with regards to photography is try and tell a story with the picture while showing as little as possible within the frame. And I think that 35 mil focal length does force you to do that. Because oftentimes when you see a scene, you say, there's a picture here somewhere. But then when you pull up the camera, you're like, it's a little tight. I have to like step back a little bit. Or you might think, well, I got to get a little bit closer. So that 35 mil lens really does make you think about the composition before you snap the picture. And that is in contrast to, say, a 16 mil or a wide angle lens where, you know, if you point it this way versus pointing it that way, the picture doesn't change that much because the field of view is so wide, there's so much overlap between the two sort of angles, or whether you're going in and out, the change is very little with a wide angle lens. But for a 35 mil lens, it is very much about the composition. So that's one of the things I discovered during my experience shooting with the 35 mil f1.8 on my Sony Alpha or A6400. And so based on that experience, I thought that the 35 mil f2 would be a worthwhile gift. And sure enough, I went and got the Fuji version. Now you'll notice that this is the XF version of the 35 mil f2, not the XC. And that's because I found a decent deal on a used copy of the Fuji XF 35 mil f2. I mean, it was still more expensive than an XC new, but you know, I figured that if I could get a decent deal on this, it was worth it because this is weather resistant. You know, it's got a better metal build quality to it, and it just looks nicer, you know. And so I splurged a little bit and got the XF version for my wife. So that's a story, and probably in another video I will include some sort of comparison shots between the 35 mil on my A6400 and the 35 mil on the XT200. All right, that's it for this one. I will see you in the next one.